Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much to the British Council for this invitation. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be here. And there are lots of different possible ways of translating actually anything. And this is my first simple point, that translation is an art, not a science, and there are fundamental limits to the development of machine translation. It's very hard to imagine machine translation ever becoming as effective as what humans do. Shakespeare has been translated, of course, into over 100 languages, and Hamlet is the most often translated play of Shakespeare's in all the world's languages. I'm very interested in the ways that records of repeated translations of Shakespeare and of other classic texts, or important, famous, often translated texts, reflect cultural history in this way. So in the bottom left-hand corner, famous lines from Romeo and Juliet. "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?" Translated into simple, easy to understand modern English, "Romeo, why are you Romeo?" Which loses a bit of the poetry, but at least everybody can understand that. Other examples from German and from French. In German, I've published a study of the translations of this couplet in German. They tell the story of not only of the history of German understandings of race, but also the history of German political history. Every regime change in German history, the translators translate differently. But one of the most interesting translations for me is this one by Hedwig Schwarz. You've probably noticed in all the photos that I've shown of the faces of translators of Shakespeare, they all, until now, have one thing in common. They're all men. Shakespeare translation is a very macho business. And Hedwig Schwarz is the only woman, at least in Germany, who has translated Othello. Translations of this couplet are very various, certainly in German, certainly in French, in other languages that I've looked at as well. And it seems probable that they are more various than translations of some other lines, which are not so problematic or so difficult. So, here's an idea. We can use the varying variation among translations. So as you go along line by line through a text, the amount of variation in all the translations varies. And we can use that to discover the difficult bits in Shakespeare, or to find where the challenges for translation are. This leads to a research project with lots of visualization outputs, which is all online. It begins with a shelf of books, my collection of translations. These then get turned into digitized text, which looks like this when you look at it in RAW. These digitized texts are then aligned with the English text, speech by speech, which enables us to produce, for example, visualizations like this. This left-hand column is like a barcode, and each bar represents a speech. The one in red represents a great long speech in which Othello tells his life story. And then this is the translation, and these lines represent alignments to where they're connected. And so we can look at these pairs of text like this, and we can see at a glance which translators have omitted text, where have they added text, where have they moved things around, and so on. So having done all that work, then we developed algorithms to help us to compare translations to find how variation varies in them. And we do that with an interface which uses two algorithms which we call eddy and viv. And eddy is a value which the computer works out for us, which tells us how distinctive a version of a segment is compared to all the other versions. And then having got all these eddy values for every individual version, we add them all up and divide them by the number of versions, that's the average, and we call that the viv value, which tells us how much variation is provoked by that segment in the source text. So some modern translations start using terms, because in German, more is translated literally as more, which means actually nothing, because nobody knows what the word means. It's not a common word anymore. A real pleasure to be here. It's a really nice audience. It's a great atmosphere. People are very friendly. I've been really enjoying it. So some fantastic presentations. I'm not an English language teaching specialist, but I've learned quite a lot. So that's been great. Everybody needs to learn English. It's becoming the global lingua franca. So it's really interesting to hear about the way that attitudes to that are developing and changing. There's much less emphasis on, say, British English or American English being standard and being correct, but more recognition of the way that English as a global language is really diverse.